Welcome to the show, Ash. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you here. And ironically, to get to doing this podcast, as you can see, Ash, I'm in my son's bedroom doing the podcast. It's basically the best spot in the house to record, and the best connection, even better than where I was at work earlier. And so, in a very unmindful sort of way, I've got on the bike and I've rushed here I've rushed home in a bit of a fluster to sort of get organised to do this chat with you. And basically, just before we chatted, I got myself a tea and had a little moment just to tune out, so that I was half reasonable in conversation with you today. So hopefully, I've really sort of set myself up for a good conversation here. And basically, with your background in meditation and mindfulness, I'm really interested in learning a little bit about your story, and basically what led you to learning a bit more about meditation, but probably how it led you to actually teaching people this as well. Because normally there's a bit of a story around it, behind the individual that's set up their business around this topic. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background, Ash, and also what led you to getting into this space in meditation and mindfulness?
Absolutely. Firstly, I believe that there are certainly no accidents in this life. And usually, when you do open up to hear other people's stories, when they are shared from that more vulnerable place, you can really get a sense of all the different parts of the puzzle, and what led them to the point that where they're at. And I guess for me, I usually when I share my story, I talk a little bit about how I believe that life can change in a moment, because I certainly know that mine did. And in fact, it was really a series of moments that undoubtedly led me to where it is that I am today, and how I got to be here sitting on a well workplaces chat talking to you. Because if you'd have told me, that I would have been doing that a number of years ago, I definitely wouldn't have believed you. For me, I guess growing up, I was what was always described as a sensitive person or a sensitive child. I had big feelings, emotions, and although I had a very loving and supportive family, I felt it really difficult to process all that I felt on the inside. And not only that, really felt like I felt everything in a really big way, whether it was my own internal feelings or dialogue, but also took on a lot about, I guess, from what other people were going through in my life around me. And later, I'd be told the term empath, which I would definitely relate to, but it wasn't something that I ever had a label for at the time or understood. And I remember my feelings, sometimes feeling so big that I would go up to my room and I would scream in a pillow, or I would cry at the smallest little thing, on the TV, or I'd hear a song. But I could never really explain why. I wasn't overly sad or angry. I just really felt and felt a lot. And I guess paired with that, I was a high achiever from an early age, which I know sometimes you hear a lot of that in this space. And I was also a people pleaser, which wasn't a very good combination. And, out of the goodness of my parents' and family's hearts, I was praised a lot, was told I could go on to do anything and put my mind to. So I studied well, I worked hard, I did well in school, I got good grades, teachers seemed to really like me. And I was always that person that would put my hand up and say, "Miss, I'm finished first, what do I do?" Which was something that made me happy for a minute or so, but always felt like I could do more. My focus was always on, I guess, what came next and how I could be better. Like somehow what I was or what I was doing or what I would do in terms of my output was never enough. And that was something that really carried on with me throughout the course of my life, really. And added to that, there was this sense of, I guess, loneliness. To the outside world, it seemed like I had plenty of friends, I was surrounded by people. But in the inside, I always felt really alone. When I was with people, I would rehearse a lot. I would be in groups and I would play out exactly the things that I would say next, or beat myself up that I had done or said the wrong thing, because I always felt like somehow I didn't really fit in. And I never knew when to speak, or, I was always afraid of what people would really think of me. And I spoke of a few of these moments about, that changed the trajectory of my life. And one of those was when I was about 13. I remember a friend of mine asked a group of girls in the group, how much they weighed. And I was asked, and everyone in the group laughed at me. And I remember panicking and saying, I'm only joking. But I remember that really hit hard. And that was something that I remembered as seeming insignificant at the time, but it was something that really stood in my mind and really reinforced that sense of not being good enough. And then when I was 17, I was seeing a boy much older than me, and it wasn't a great relationship. And despite my parents and friends telling me, he was no good, not good news, and to leave him, it took for me to actually go to uni and that big transition time for him to break up with me, and broke my heart. And, at the time, those childhood romances, they seem partly insignificant, but in your world, they're a big thing. And that reinforced again that story that I had of not being good enough. And because I felt like I'd turned my back on my friends and my family, I felt ashamed to turn back to them and ask for help. And I wasn't coping. I was overwhelmed with emotions, but I didn't have those inner resources to meet what to me actually felt like a bit of a trauma. It was too much for my nervous system to handle. And it was around that time that my panic attacks started and my struggles with mental health started escalating. And I remember being in a mock exam in my uni days. It was my final year of uni, and my body was giving me all of these signals right in the middle of the exam that I wasn't okay. My heart was beating really fast. I actually thought that I was going to die. I ran out of the room and sat on the floor, and I tried to just breathe myself back until I came like. My mic unmuted there.
There you go. That's
so,
all right.
So I couldn't think. I remember at the time, and I was afraid, that panic of feeling like I was going to actually fail an exam, that just consumed me. And I didn't in the end, but it left me with questions. And those panic attacks, they became something that was really frequent in my life. I left uni with the top class marks, first class honors, and I walked into a dream job, well, what looked like it on paper. But my body couldn't keep up with the demands of that high pressure and fast paced world and my own unrealistic standards. And as the years went on, I really lost that ability to find any sense of balance in that high pressure corporate environment, and that ability to put my health and my happiness first in my personal life. And so one Tuesday morning, I'd been working through the night. I was exhausted, I was stressed, my heart was racing. And suddenly I found myself on the bathroom floor. I'd had another panic attack, and unfortunately, it wasn't my first that week, but this time I had actually passed out. And this was the one that changed everything for me. It was a catalyst, it was the time where, in that moment where I realized I really had to do something here. I had to start prioritizing my well-being and putting myself first. I started investigating and researching tools and strategies that would help me find some balance in the midst of my busy mind and the busyness in the world around me. And find those opportunities, where I could really unplug. And from there, it hasn't always been straightforward. It hasn't necessarily always been easy. But these tools then soon became something that I could have in my toolkit ongoing, that I would always have access to, regardless of the situation that I found myself in, or wherever, I was working, whatever I was doing. I don't believe that it fixed me. I don't feel like we were ever broken, but these are things that now help me meet the demands of my life and work and navigate that with a whole lot more ease. So from that, then it's really been my mission to share that, my own experience, in the hope that my past can help to inspire other people's futures, to find ways to meet those inner and outer worlds with a lot more ease and intention. And it's been my mission to help organizations and individuals to do that all over the world.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for sharing that story. And well, it's your story, and it's real, and obviously there's plenty of, you've had lots of different challenges along the way, as a lot of people do. But I think what's amazing about that story is how insightful the insights that you've gained from that, and turning it into a positive and something that you can share as a lived experience. Because I know through the different people that connect with us through workplaces and our other channels, is it's a familiar tale, I guess, of well, not always familiar, but for some people, the burnout situation that occurs in the corporate environment, especially the feeling of wearing those late night meetings almost as a badge of, it was considered a badge of honor at some point, actually ends up being the person that pays for it is the individual that's staying up late. And I know in out there in the world, there's lots of people that are still in that cycle. And to share your insights and your experience with, especially with panic attacks, is yeah, it's great to be able to share that with such insight. I'm interested, Ash, how you ended up going from, it's really like the understanding that you have of it, to go then into the different tools that you've learnt along the way. I'm assuming that you've got a tool bag with a lot of different things in there that help you on a daily and a weekly basis. Out of the ones that you started with, the tools that you started to learn, where did you really begin with in terms of meditation or mindfulness? Was there one of those that really, I guess, helped you quite a lot at the start of your journey of picking up different tools and helping, I guess, with your own self-care?
Yeah, I mean, how I got into it and how it all began was my housemate invited me along to a yoga class. And at the time, it was seen to me not necessarily as something that I would recognize as a tool, or, this was going to help me in some way. It was more so, it was actually a hot yoga class. So, that do more, be more, push more mentality, which was very much my A-type personality at the time, and
Yeah.
something that I've struggled with a lot ever since, was like, oh yes, I'm going to sweat lots and, detox
Yeah.
and all the things. It wasn't necessarily like, okay, this is going to help me slow down. And throughout the class, I remember that first ever class I went into, it was 90 minutes and I hated every second of it. But I remember at the end, there was 5 minutes which I now know is called Shavasana, but at the time it was just, lying on the floor. And from that first class, I physically couldn't do anything else because I was exhausted and, overwhelmed at the class. But I remember it was actually, when I look at it, it was the very first time that I had 5 minutes where I just sat with myself. And that was something that was a complete foreign, concept to me. It was something that I never prioritized, but it felt really good. And it was like a stroke of amnesia kind of hit, because I seemed to have forgotten the other 85 minutes before I went to the next class, because I would just remember that feeling. And it was something then that did firstly become quite addictive, and often you see this when we look at well-being, things that are deemed to be, in inverted commas, healthy, like exercise or, nutrition and things like that, that on the outset can seem like we're doing the right thing. But if we approach it with the wrong mindset or for the wrong intentions, can actually do more harm than good. So for me, it was nearly a bit of a 180, because then that became my new obsession. That became my new fixation. It wasn't necessarily just working up till 3 a.m. and doing more. It was like I had to do 7 classes a day and I could not miss one, and you see that a lot, I think, when it comes to well-being. But what that did do was it opened a door. It cracked open a door for me, and I started slowly opening that door a little wider, getting to know myself a little bit more. Each of those shavasanas, every time that I did that, I would find something new, or I would find, initially I remember I actually couldn't even lie there. I had to count my breath. I remember that was my one helpful thing. It just gave me something to focus my mind on. But in that, that ability to ground yourself and start to downregulate your nervous system, that slowly but slowly became a bit more easier to access. And then that opened the whole door for me down to, again, it was like, oh, I must go on and teach this now. I can't possibly just have it as a practice. So I did a teacher training. And that, as part of that, I was very fortunate that I had an incredible mentor and teacher, Marika Knight, who led a mindfulness-based stress reduction course, or the program, which is known as usually, I guess, the gold standard of 8 weeks mindfulness programs. And for that, again, a similar theme, hated every second. For the whole 8 weeks, we had to do 40 minutes of meditation every day. And although it was the most difficult thing to do, to actually just slow down and sit with myself, it started to change, those neural pathways and those long-form habitual patterns that I had, and started slowly to slow things down, to help me meet myself and to just be a whole lot nicer to myself, to let go of the judgment and start to build that toolkit that you spoke about.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, I can't imagine people starting at that 40-minute mark of learning to meditate, and it would have just been a nice. I can just imagine that feeling though of really dedicate, like that mindset shift to go. I'm going to really have a good go at this. Perhaps a little bit of that type A kicking in to really go. I'm going to learn this really well. But it sounds like through that journey as well, you probably would have noticed, I'm imagining, from a physiological level or a nervous system level, some benefits just from doing something like that course, and no doubt that's something that you bring into your workshops and courses and retreats that you teach in your own business. What are some of those physiological benefits that you experienced, and also what are some of the things that beginners might experience when they first learn meditation or mindfulness, for that matter?
Yeah, I mean, with mindfulness, the biggest thing that, firstly, I recognized, because it was my initial thoughts and feelings around it, is that it's very misunderstood. It's, when you break it down, it's really just that ability to become fully aware and attentive to, your inner and your outer environments. So thinking about where you are, what you're doing, how you're feeling, all the while not being overly reactive, or judgmental of what it is that you're meeting or experiencing at any given moment. And what we see and what we feel, unfortunately, it gets a bit of a bad rap. And I know I'm not the first person to say this, but there is this sense that it's spiritual or it's mysterious, or that it's reserved, for the monks or the green juice loving hippies. But that's not necessarily the case. And it's also not just about, zenning out or relaxing. It's actually about showing up more fully to your life. And whether that's in work or whether that's outside of work, as we know, we live very much hybrid lifestyles these days. So it's all one. But what I did start noticing, and what I continue to notice, and this is a lot of what I share, is that we don't practice meditation to get good at meditation or get better at meditation, and that's that A-type thing kind of kicking in again. We're such an achievement and a goal-oriented society. We have to feel like we're trying to get somewhere. But what meditation actually does, and mindfulness, is it strips that all back. It really shows that this act of non-doing is where you gain the benefits in your life. Because what I was noticing wasn't necessarily, any sort of effect when I was sitting on my cushion or lying down or whatever it was. What it was, where I started seeing the benefits, was actually when I started opening up my eyes. And I could go down the the physiological benefits till the cows come home, in terms of better heart health, better immunity, nervous system, sleeping better, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, it's when I talk about, those other elements, like actually paying attention to your life, like showing up for the conversations that you're in, having better relationships, having better decision making, problem solving, all of these other incredible things like resilience, leadership, decision making. creativity and innovation, all of these wonderful things that are so needed. And these are usually the conversations that I have in the workplace. Because initially what happens is you come in and you're brought in maybe for a one-off 30-minute meditation session, which is amazing, and absolutely wonderful that these organizations are open to these ideas and starting to do these things. But it's actually the ongoing work, and that real, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? That real commitment, I guess, to cultural change, and starting to see how do we actually embed these aspects of mindfulness into our everyday, into how we structure our meetings, into how, we prioritize rest within our everyday. That's actually where you start to see the real long-term benefits and the changes. Because as you so rightly mentioned, burnout, stress, they're epidemics in and of themselves. People are really struggling out there, and I don't need to go down into all the millions and billions of dollars and lost productivity and all of the things, but actually looking after your people and recognizing that these elements, they play a real part to play in not only just how people feel, but also in equipping them with the soft skills that we need. That's really where the real benefit lies.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned hybrid working as well, and that's an ongoing thing. That's not really going to change. Perhaps it's even going to go more remote, especially in knowledge workers. I'm wondering, from your perspective and with the teams that you've taught or the corporate retreats that you've done, how are some organisations incorporating mindfulness or mindful practice into their workflows? I think that's you mentioned meetings earlier. Is that how is that practically done, or how do you recommend some of those things get done in that team environment?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different ways, and some of the things that I'm hearing versus some of the things that I share as well have been really interesting. I think people are getting really creative, and it's wonderful to see that these things are getting prioritized. I know that some organizations, they have digital detox hours, whereas like from the hour of 12 to 1, it's blocked out in everyone's calendars. For some, they're actually locked off and kicked off the system, so they actually physically can't access them, which has been really interesting, and giving that ability to let go of the distractions, because we are such a distracted modern society and always on. People have been taking a lot of walking meetings. I'm seeing that rather than being, having so much screen time and that constant, I think there's a lot of digital fatigue and Zoom fatigue and Teams fatigue and all the things. People are opting instead to say, hey, we don't need to be on camera. How about we take this meeting and actually have a call, and you take a walk around the block, and we'll do it that way instead. Other things that I've been talking a lot to teams about is that transition time, which is incredibly important. And I know I've heard you have some conversations with others around this, is that, the commute to work that we would have had, to and from the office, that's a really clear line in your day that switches work on and off. And when we are living and working at home, those lines get blurred, So how do you start to actively and consciously incorporate transition times into your day? Do you maybe, and a lot of people I'm hearing are promoting walks to and from the office. So, actually getting out of your house and walking even around the block to come back in to then open up your laptop. And same at the end of the day. I talk about how do you incorporate a little more in terms of those transition times. So physically actually changing your clothes when you finish your workday to, switch that mode in your brain from always on, to this is my relaxed time, this is my zone out time. Setting timers on your devices, on your apps, actually deleting your apps on the weekends, having separate spaces where possible. I know it's not always possible in certain living spaces, but where you work and where you actually relax in your downtime, having them is completely separate. So that might look like not having the laptop on the couch or on the bed, and actually having, even if it's at the kitchen table, that's your workplace. Taking away those distractions, like actually shutting down and maybe removing your laptop or your phone if you can. setting phones on flight modes at certain times, not always available, I know, for parents and people who have other responsibilities, but just starting to get a little bit more conscious and aware of how we spend our time and when we're on versus when we're actually taking the time to rest. So that's been really important too.
Yeah, there's some really good tips. Thanks so much for that. I love the one where it's changing the clothes. I think that's really great. I feel like that's something that in our household anyway. My wife and I work, hybrid, I guess, and go from that formal wear to the clothes. Like I think we've just done that subconsciously. And also another one that we've done is like, all right, I'm going to have a shower. And the shower basically means I'm going to be like Clark Kent and go into the thing and then come out a different person. So you kind of come in maybe a little bit ratty from work, and you tune out in the shower and come out and be a better human. So really love that though, because they're all, I guess, as you said earlier, with mindfulness or meditation, it's fair to say that some people may perceive it to be for, as you said, the green smoothie or green juice hippies type people, or the monks, for example. There's actually a lot of performance improvements that can come with it, which you did mention earlier. Also, Ash, with some of your workshops, there's one really good workshop that you run called Feeling It, and through that workshop, I'm just wondering with that, because in there you do include a lot of, I guess it's practical as well. Within that type of workshop, what's the most common response that you get when you start getting people to practice some of those techniques?
Yeah, I think for me, what's really important is that anything that I share is practical. It relates back to the person themselves. I think giving people and arming them with those tools and techniques is something that's really important. Death by PowerPoint isn't going to make real change in people's lives. So that's what I always like to do. And by having people actually tune in to themselves, which I often get this sense or this feedback of like, this actually feels like I'm doing this for the very first time. Something as simple as, actually giving yourself, taking a second to stop and say, how am I doing today on a scale of 1 to 10? Where 1 is feeling extremely flat, depleted, exhausted. 10 feels really energized and motivated. Where am I sitting on that scale today? How often do we actually take the time to do that? And with that awareness comes choice. With awareness and information, we get that understanding of how it is that we're doing, but also that ability to make a conscious decision of, okay, how do I best support myself through that number? If it's a 10, amazing. If it's a 1, okay, that's information. How do I actually, what might have led me to that point, but also what can I do about it? And then in terms of the Feeling It workshop specifically, we work through the signs and signals. What's your actually traffic light system? When you do feel like you're at a red, you're at an amber, you're at a green, what are the signs and signals that are applicable to you, and what can you start to do about it? So things that might take 3 seconds all the way up to 30 minutes, depending on what time you've got or where you're at in your day. Things that you can start to incorporate frequently when perhaps you might not necessarily feel like you need it, so that you can access it more readily when you do. So that's something that I find has really, really been received well. And I know individuals and organizations have been getting a lot from and continue to be practicing, which has been wonderful as a facilitator to hear.
Yeah, that's right. And the death by PowerPoint, as you put it, it has to be practical, right? And also within meditation and mindfulness practice, like you've got to start somewhere. So it's just simply about having a go at it. When people are about to try this or embed this in their life and start to create maybe a ritual around this within their day, where do you start? Are we talking, earlier you mentioned that 40-minute, retreat perhaps where you're doing it. That's probably the extreme side. I'm imagining there's like a starting point. Where do you normally recommend for individuals to start?
Yeah, I think that's the key. It's to start small. If
Mm.
we give ourselves a task that's a tall task, we're very much setting ourselves up for failure, which isn't going to help anything in terms of habit making. So generally starting small, whether it's, a minute, 5 minutes, 3 deep breaths, even if that's all it is, that's an incredible way to start. To be accountable, to find ways that, you can actually keep yourself accountable throughout the day, whether it's a daily planner or a weekly planner or something like that you tick off every day. We love to tick a box as humans and individuals. So often that can be something that's really helpful. Another is to commit to the same time every day. So to tie it perhaps to an existing task, that's a tried and proven method in terms of habit setting. So whether it's, first thing when you get up in the morning, when you're lying in bed, or just before or after you brush your teeth or have your first cup of coffee in the morning, having that existing habit that you can just tie it into really helps when we're starting to break and form those new neural pathways, to make it initially might find some resistance, but then can be a lot easier to make it into an ongoing thing. So yeah, start small, be accountable, tie it into an existing habit, same time every day, but also not beat yourself up. If you miss a day or something comes up, we're all human, life gets in the way. Just start again the next day, and don't let it be a reason for, to say you failed or to give yourself a hard time. That's the complete opposite of what we're trying to do. So yeah, I would give those, I guess, as pointers if anyone's looking to start.
Absolutely. They are fantastic tips. Ash, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story with us, and also amazing work in turning it into a really positive outcome or an endeavour in terms of helping workplaces and individuals embrace meditation and mindfulness in a really practical way. So thanks again for your time, and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Tom.